So, just settling back into your meditation posture, whatever is most conducive to you, whether that's sitting upright or lying down, standing, walking, jogging, driving your car. If you're driving your car, don't close your eyes. But otherwise, you can close your eyes. You don't have to. If some people find it uncomfortable to try to meditate with their eyes closed. And so it's fine to meditate with your eyes open. Many traditions actually teach that way. And so settling in just into this place of physical stillness. And just feeling the body at rest. Having a sense of relaxing, letting go, releasing the shoulders if they're hunched at all, softening the belly. Let your breath move deeply into the body, into the belly. Just taking a little time to scan the body, to find any points of tension that you can release, as well as just letting the attention absorb into the sensations, feeling the life of the body. When we start to pay attention to the body just through the lens of sensation, it can change how we perceive the body. You can feel it as a field of sensations, a field of energies, rather than individual parts or a form that you see in your mind's eye, just feeling it as this flow. There's the breath that moves in the body, and the nervous system communicating. Sending information through the senses. Our ordinary way of responding to those sense impressions is that only the pleasant and the unpleasant get our attention. Pleasant ones are ones we try to increase or enjoy. Unpleasant ones we try to change, get rid of. But this leaves a whole range of experiences that we don't pay attention to, ones that aren't pleasant or unpleasant. which is probably most of the sense experiences we have. So one of the things we do with mindfulness is that we start to pay attention to these so-called neutral sense impressions. The breath is a good example of that. There's usually nothing dramatic, particularly pleasant or unpleasant about the breath. So there are circumstances when that can change, but most of the time, neutral. That's also true of many other sensations, the touch sensations, that field of energy, impression. Nothing really dramatic about it on its surface. Just life happening moment by moment. One of the benefits of paying attention to the neutral is that those sense impressions don't trigger craving or aversion. So resting our attention with the neutral inclines the mind toward equanimity, toward peace. The one way we can go wrong with this is when we start to grasp after the neutral. When we start to really want to pay attention more to the breath or more to the other sense experiences, then we've taken these neutral sense experiences and turned them into objects of desire, even though they are not pleasant in and of themselves. We've made them with our minds something to want. This is, of course, the regular challenge of our practice, is not to get caught in wanting or in not wanting, in aversion. So a certain degree of our mindfulness needs to be applied to observing whether we are falling into some form of desire or aversion. All right. As I said earlier, I'd like to just see if there are questions today. And you can use the traditional virtual hand raising, or if you're really brazen, you can just unmute yourself and speak. And I recognize that sometimes after meditating, the mind gets a little quiet, can't really think of anything. That's okay. We know how to sit and do nothing.
Brazen. Okay, so can you talk a little bit about the difference between, or how to distinguish right intention from grasping? So if I am intending in the right way, how does that look as opposed to intending in the wrong way, intending to get it, intending to, yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. Well, one of my, beliefs, whatever, my sense, my experience is that it's rare when there's a pure intention of any kind. And so it's not so much that I'm going to, clean out there's not going to be no ego-centered desire or aversion going on, but that I'm not letting that be the dominant guiding purpose in a behavior. And so, there are two ways we operate around this. One is through the felt experience that tells us, we get the cues from the body, from the heart, from the emotional state. How does this feel? Does this feel right? And also through the lens of, self-inquiry, kind of cognitive, like what's going on in my mind, and just being, and this is one of the great values of having a program that emphasizes, self-inquiry, doing inventory is very much shows us how we've been driven by, wrong intention. And we become familiar with those habits and those self-deceptions, and start to be able to, detect that better, the rigorous honesty. So, so to me, I mean, it's not exactly a perfect Dharma answer to the question, but I'm trying to get at. Because it seems like a very practical question rather than, is there something the Buddha said about this? I mean, we can, we know, like the Buddha said, right intention has the elements of renunciation, of loving kindness, and of compassion. Those are the three things that we should use as motivators in our lives. But as you're suggesting, it's not that simple most of the time. And for instance, and I'd love to hear like an example from you, but I mean, just the idea of, I'm going to help somebody out, and then recognizing, I hope I'm going to get this from them, whether it's something material or practical or emotional. And oh, wow, like I thought I was trying to be nice and generous, but I see that behind that there's a selfishness. And so then you go, well, should I not do this? Should I not help this person? And then it's really a question of, well, do I really care about them? Am I really doing, is there this strong wish to help them, or is it purely, I don't really like them, I don't really care about them, but they can give me what I want, I'm going to get, buy coffee for my boss or whatever, so that kind of examination, I think, that to me is the practical approach to it. What do you think?
Yeah, that's great. And renunciation, loving kindness, and compassion. Yeah, that seems like, okay. So yeah, doing metta, and sometimes really kind of getting it, really, really being convinced, that this is the way, that the self-centeredness kind of falls away, and there's a big heart and big freedom and all this business. So, but a lot of times it's not like that. A lot of times it's like, I'm after something.
Sure.
So it's so motivation, just being mindful. I mean, increasing the mindfulness, increasing the honesty, like what you said. Yeah, it's like, how honest can I be? How clear can I be, about what's really going on? And sometimes I don't want to look, sometimes I'm like, I'm not going to go there.
Sure.
But anyway, it's an interesting inquiry, and I think, oh, I'm here it is, and then I'm kind of like, the self-centeredness. I mean, the big book comes to mind.
Yeah, it does indeed.
It does.
I think we can also, though, become too sort of fastidious about this, and just to recognize that good intentions are good intentions, and we don't have to go probing around looking for trouble necessarily. There is this idea, there's another term besides tanha, which is the thirst that causes suffering, cause of suffering. But then there's this thing, chanda, which is the wish to do good in the world. And so it's still a form, you could say it's a kind of desire, but
right.
It's a wholesome desire. And I'm not really sure how, in a technical sense, that fits with the definition of the elements of right intention, but I think it's something to honor, and as I say, not to go, I think that people, when we get onto a spiritual path, we can get overly rigorous about, judging ourselves, basically. And that's one of the problems with the inventory, the sometimes overemphasis on inventory. It's like, give yourself a break, and that's why I say not expecting intention to be pure and perfect, but to appreciate that, okay, there is good intention in this, that seems good enough.
Okay, and the good enough, the good enough thing is great.
Good enough, Thanks, Vicki.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah. Cheryl, hello.
Good morning, Kevin. Good morning, Sangha. On the subject of letting go, which comes up in the program of AA and in our Buddhist studies, and I was listening to a talk the other day at Longpor Sumedho, and I think he said something rather key for my understanding, and it was when we take the suffering is in when we take the letting go personal. When we can be the observer I believe there would be less suffering. And I think I was thinking of, well, actually, he was asked about his experience with COVID, and he was able just to be with the symptoms, observe the virus, but not attached to having it. You know, it wasn't like, so I'm thinking as an alcoholic, this is the situation, this is what it's like. It's just like this, but I don't, when I take things personal is when I find the suffering. It almost as if in the second arrow is when I add all the when I'm not being the observer, I'm clinging to the personal part. Yes, or maybe just elaborate on that a little bit. And also, I wanted to ask if it's okay. When a monk is referred to as Ajahn, that moves to Longpur at what point, or is that?
Yeah, well, Ajahn is a formal title that's given after a monk has been in robes for 10 rainy seasons, so 10 years. And this is just in Thailand, as far as I know. That's where that term is used. So it does have a formal designation that requires 10 years. Lumpur is more of just an informal term. I believe it means like uncle. So it's just like for really elder teachers that are kind of, been around for a really long time, people start to call them Lumpur. And it's really like our dear uncle teacher, but it's not a formal designation that you are given as much as people just call you that. Good question, actually. And so going back to the first point, Lumpur Sumedho, Ajahn Sumedho, he's somebody people should listen to, and he's really one of the elders in the Western Buddhist community, probably the elder. He ordained in the late 60s with Ajahn Chah, and he has particular themes that run through his teaching. And you're describing one of them, and really kind of the central one, which is just selfing, and when self arises and how that's underneath all suffering. And it's another, just sort of coming at the same points we're talking about from different kind of language or different idea. And so because when we are being mindful, when we're being fully mindful, there is no I arising in that. And that's one of the things that is kind of distinctive about mindfulness, right? There's just the object and the attention to the object. And the form of attention is particular in that it is devoid of grasping, it is devoid of aversion. And so by definition, it's devoid of self, because self is really manifests as grasping or aversion. Without grasping and aversion, self isn't really operating, because self is all about me, and me is all about getting what I want, and, getting things to be, it's about control. And so it's, as I say, I think just kind of a different way of coming at the same idea. And for myself, in my failings as a practitioner, so I don't really get to that. Self isn't really the way that I get there, like thinking about self, which of course already is like a contradiction, really. But observing self, it's like, I find that confusing. So I love his teaching, but I get confused by it. So that's why I recommend people should listen to him, because, you know, he's a brilliant teacher and as clear as any teacher I've ever heard. And, you know, you may find that he hits something. He has a way of hitting something that really will break through for you. But I do think that the idea of self or no self can be very confusing because it just immediately kind of triggers this analytical thing. It's a way in which it so easily can turn back on you. And so I kind of avoid that particular gateway into insight. My gateway into insight is suffering. You know, it always has been. You know, there are three gateways. There's this gateway of self, not self. There's the gateway of impermanence, and there's the gateway of suffering. Those are the three characteristics, right? And any practitioner will tend to find that they are drawn to a particular gateway. So you find that the most popular gateway in Western Buddhism is impermanence. It's the one that most insight meditation teachers focus on as a gateway into letting go, because ultimately we can say, when I say insight, we could also say another term for that, or another element of that is letting go. Because what we're trying to do with our practice ultimately is let go of clinging. So we can see how all three of these gateways help us with that. The gateway of impermanence helps us to let go of clinging, because it shows us that everything is constantly changing. So it can't really be, you can't hold it. So instead of trying to hold it, you go, oh, okay, give it up. The gateway of self is there. It's empty. When you try to find it, there's nothing there. And so it kind of disappears in front of you as soon as you try to, where's self? What is self? And impermanence implies not self, because if things are constantly changing, then there's no solid self. Then suffering, of course, is the kind of the gateway into recovery. Well, that's why we get sober and clean, because, you know, we were suffering. And so we realized that we needed to let go of the thing that was causing the suffering. So each of those is just a way to let go. And yeah, so I won't go further with that, but it's a good reflection for each of us. What is my gateway into letting go? So Julie.
Good morning, Sangha. I really, really super appreciated, first of all, that was extremely helpful. And I really appreciated the way you spoke today about neutrality. Because for me, when I think of positive, negative, neither positive nor negative, if something's neutral, that goes in my positive. You know, like I feel neutral about something, that's a good thing. But in terms of non-triggering, neutrality doesn't trigger craving or aversion.
Right.
Woo, that just, for me, that wording around that, it just is so helpful. I mean, I can rest in that. I can appreciate now neutrality in a way that I haven't before, because I can see that once I move it to my positive, then I want that. Yeah. I want neutrality, and that kind of defeats the purpose. So your languaging around that was just so spot on for me. So thank you. The non-triggering, I love that. And I just want to mention, Oh my goodness, your Spirit Rock Offering Friday, the 5 precepts through the eyes of antidotes to the 3 poisons. That was just so incredibly impactful in the most awesome way. Be available either on your website or on the Spirit Rock archival kind of records.
Yeah, it should be on Dharma Seed.
Dharma Seed.
Yeah, Dharma Seed. It's just Dharma Seed, like something you plant.
Right.
They are the longtime repository of all the Spirit Rock and IMS Dharma teachers. You can find thousands, if not tens of thousands of talks on there. They actually have an app now. And if you want me, you can get as much as me. There's a couple hundred of my talks on there. And actually they kind of dropped the ball on my talks this year, and I had to recently get on them to make sure they put them up there. So I have to go back and double check whether they've done that. But they're supposed to put, every time I give a talk, they're supposed to put them up there. Yeah.
Thank you. And if I can just plug that for anybody who wasn't there on Friday, really, really beautiful, beautiful offering. Thank you.
I'm glad to know that. I don't really remember much about it, but I appreciate that. Then thank you for bringing up the neutrality thing. There aren't that many things that I think of as somewhat original insights of mine, but that's one I've never heard anybody else say, and it's something I came to just over the past couple of years, because it's a really interesting connection. Because as neutrality, the neutral, when we talk about pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, which we usually refer to around feeling or Vedana, it doesn't sound interesting. And it's like, most of our time, even in our meditation practice, like, notice when there's craving, notice when there's aversion, be mindful of that. But I came to realize that when we're paying attention to the breath, it's neutral, and that if you get absorbed in the neutral experience, that would actually be equanimity. And equanimity, I mean, on a profound level, that you can get, that this could be a jhana experience if you're absorbed in equanimity, because the 4th jhana is equanimity. And what is equanimity but the state of neither grasping nor aversion? The state. And so what looks like an uninteresting thing, the neutral, is actually, if we can get absorbed in it, a very powerful thing. And it simply is, when we say, take a breath, we're just trying to go to a neutral place. And what happens when we go to a neutral place? We relax, So it's very interesting. Yeah. Stephen, hello.
Hello, thank you. Hello, everyone. So I guess this is probably a meditation question or something. When I'm focusing on my breath and something comes to me, I'll call it an insight. I don't know if it's really an insight, but just like, that's what I'm feeling, or that's where it's coming from, or just something that just makes it's an insight to me, something.
Sure.
What I struggle with it, at what point am I lost in thought and I need to get back to my breath?
Yeah.
Versus staying with whatever that is. That's what I struggle with. I'd be interested in your thought about that.
Yeah, really good question. And it's, again, not something I think there's a clear distinction necessarily. So when we introduce people to meditation, we try to keep it very simple, which I think is wise, because in the beginning, you need very clear guidelines. And the guideline is, if you notice that you're thinking, let it go and come back to your breath. End of story, right? That's what we do. As we become more experienced, and I would say sophisticated meditators, it becomes possible to spend a certain amount of time in reflection, which is, I think, a really good term. So reflection is intentional thought, as opposed to contemplation, which I have come to understand recently, is close observation of experience. So I always thought contemplation was reflection, but I learned through my studies and my attempt to say things about the things I am studying, that contemplation is the close observation of an experience, but reflection is intentional thought. And so what that means is that sometimes we get on a track in our meditation and we're not really lost. We're not caught in grasping or aversion. An idea has arisen. It's very much like creative work. And indeed, with my own writing, a lot of my writing comes out of meditative reflection. But just as with an artist or a musician, we get absorbed into an idea that we sense has some thread of meaning that we want to follow. And in a sense, a lot of times I think when we catch these things, we already sense that we know the answer, but we have to clarify it for ourselves through a kind of this reflective process that we would say thinking through something. And so when that happens in meditation, first of all, I think it's unavoidable in meditation, and it's it's one of those little mentioned secrets of meditation, that everybody does this, but we don't talk about it because of the potential for it to be, as you're suggesting, like, oh, am I just spacing out or am I reflecting? Well, there's only one person who can decide that, who can determine that. And that is you in that moment. And you just have to ask yourself, am I just like indulging here? Or is something really unfolding for me? And as I often point to, I think where you kind of can know this is the feeling in your body. You'll feel, is there this grasping feeling that we get familiar with when we meditate regularly? Or is there sort of a sense of openness? And again, I'm sure many of you have done like some kind of creative work or artistic work where like you're in flow. And that's another great term, I think, for that this kind of reflection happens as flow. And it's like, oh yeah, this is just, I'm kind of sorting something out. Something's getting clarified. It's not a waste of time, it's not at all. It's not the same as insight in the definition, in the sort of strict definition of insight in Buddhism. Insight is more of a felt experience or a sudden clarity, like a moment of clarity. It's like, oh, I get it. There's no need for reflection. It's just a knowing. And it's a sensing. And this is what another one of the reasons I like the Four Noble Truths and the Gateway of Suffering, because the insight into suffering comes when we see that when our mind starts grasping, it's painful. And there's you don't have to think about it. You know, when you meditate, and you meditate regularly or to any degree of like really noticing what's going on, you get to very familiar with this feeling of like, oh God, okay, why was I thinking about that? And you learn like, okay, just stop doing that, come back to the breath. And after a while, you realize, oh, like getting caught up in thinking about myself or my anger or the new car or whatever, or the fear, that's painful. And so I should just stop. Nobody really has to tell you to do it, but people do tell you to stop because that's what the Dharma teaches. You start to see that, and you don't have to really think about it because it's a felt experience. It's a known experience, and that's insight in Buddhist terms. And it's transformative when we realize, or when we decide we're just not going to do it anymore. So every time a grasping comes up, you just let go automatically. Now, I would say that to get to that point would be some kind of enlightenment. But a good example of that relates to just one thing is addiction. Like the idea of having a drink is just, for me, it's just like, boom, no, there's no grasping anymore there. That's been let go of because of the suffering, the insight into the suffering. So just to try to clarify the difference between insight, which is, as I say, just a felt experience and a known experience, versus reflection, which is more of an intentional thought on a theme, and then contemplation, which is close observation. Yes, come here for your dictionary. No, but I do think I talk about this stuff because I've struggled with these terms and with what they meant in terms of my own practice. Now, I remember this woman who used to come to the Wednesday group, Wes Nisker's Wednesday group, that eventually I adopted back in the late 90s. And she was a poet, and she was kind of an angry poet. At least she was angry when she asked this question, which was, if I'm mindful, I can't write poetry. And I'm like, no, that's not quite right. I'm not sure why you think that, because what she knew about meditation was I'm supposed to just let go of all my thoughts, right? And as I said, that's the first thing we teach people, because we first have to learn to let go of thoughts before we can do anything else in meditation. Because we're trying to take some control, if you will, of our minds, of our mental behavior. And in order to do that, the first thing we have to do is we have to learn to stop thinking for moments, and if we start people out by saying, oh, you can be reflective and write poetry, then they'll never stop writing poetry when they're supposedly meditating, and it won't be reflection. It'll be grasping after, oh, I need to finish my book of poems, and so the first thing we teach is let go of thinking. I think many of you, if not most of you, are experienced enough as meditators that you can trust yourself to do some reflection. If you aren't experienced as a meditator, you should just learn to let go of thinking, and do that, and go on a 10-day retreat, and you'll get an idea of what that's about. So it's okay to write poetry, but just don't grasp after it, you know. And as a side note, I will mention that the Inquiring Mind magazine, which is defunct now, but great Buddhist magazine that you can find online, archived, they would find that after every long meditation retreat at Spirit Rock or IMS, they would get this deluge of like Dharma poems that people wrote, you know, at the end of the retreat, like, breathe, let go, everything is empty. Ah, brilliant. I think I'll send that to IMS or to Inquiring Mind. It's like, oh, yeah. Well, so watch out for those cliches when you start writing your Dharma poetry. It's a lot of it's been done. Well, we've come to the traditional end point. Yeah, a lot of fun to just take your questions and to go through this stuff.
Excellent.
Yeah, thank you. Just a reminder that you can offer me dana, and I'm not talking about Richie Valens' girlfriend. I'm talking about the generosity gifts in the form of cash or virtual cash. Yeah, I mean, you know, I will confess that, you know, I don't know the confession. I mean, I do depend on teaching Dharma for my living, and not being able to travel and teach definitely has made an impact in the last couple of years. So it's really appreciated when people offer dana. I will also mention that someone mentioned recently that they didn't hear back from me whether I got their dana, because I don't usually thank people, and I don't. It's a funny thing, you know, because I always feel like dana is a thank you. And then if I thank people, it kind of gets to be like, well, thank you. No, thank you. No, thank you. And I actually, and I might be wrong here, you know, but I can't, and if you want me to, I don't know, maybe people can give me feedback whether they'd like to get a little thank you when they give some dana, but I kind of try to take it as like, not self, like just receiving, accepting, not turning it into an emotional thing. Just anyway, I'm grateful. If you ever wonder, I am thanking you in my mind when I see, oh look, so and so gave me $5. That's great. I can use that. Yeah. Anyway. Not to put too fine a point on it. I am planning a bit of a trip in September, so we're going to have some subs some of the time, and I'm going to be here some of the time. All the dates are not exactly worked out, but I will be here this Friday night and next week. So look forward to seeing you all. And since I've been trying to make a theme out of each, at the end of each class, let's make our theme today right intention that Vicki started the day with. And so just noticing today the decisions you're making and whether they are driven by greed, hatred, or by renunciation. Renunciation just means letting go, like non-grasping, and then, or loving kindness, or non-harming, or compassion. You know, what's behind your actions, and indeed your thoughts. You know, that's ultimately where you want to get to, is what is the motivation behind this thought? You know, and you know, good luck with that. Be kind to yourself, whatever you discover. Okay.
Thank you